Hello, story seekers. I'm Nico.
I'm Ben, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
For this, our very first showcase episode, we're joined by an author, activist, and speaker who has won awards for her journalism and her activism.
Her books include the best-selling biography, Charles, the Heart of a King, Attack of the 50-Foot Women, How Gender Equality Can Save the World, and Immortality, The Pleasures and Perils of Living Agelessly. She also co-founded both the Women's Equality Party and the Prima Donna Festival. Her recent novel, Time Life, was published in April 2025 and is a love letter to science fiction rooted in a very real present of rising populism and the unintended consequences of technology. Above all, it is a powerful meditation on the nature of love itself.
We would like to warmly welcome Catherine Mayer.
Hello, Catherine.
Hi.
We say warmly welcome. It's very
Yeah.
fitting for this time of year, isn't
It's
it?
quite hot, isn't it? Yeah. I was just about to say, we've had to cut that down considerably to get that into our normal introduction space. You have had a very impressive career and a very varied career so far. Does it feel like that to you?
It's funny, isn't it? I think one of the things about getting to a certain age is that a little bit of looking backwards and thinking what you've done rather than what you will do becomes inevitable. But I think one of the reasons I've done so many things is that I'm constitutionally disinclined to that kind of backwards looking approach to life. So I'm always kind of rushing at the next thing and the next thing. I don't know. I mean, I just always think that there's more to do. And that notion that you're only is, it's not so much about being good at things. I was going to say you're only as good as your last book, but for me, I never really stop feeling that there are things to do, whether it's things that I want to write or, I mean, you mentioned being an activist, and there's so much that's wrong with the world. So,
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to relax if you're of that mindset.
That's a great
Do you
answer.
find it ever prevents you stopping to smell the roses, though? That you're always in hot pursuit, or do you find moments to enjoy what you've done and where you are?
Well, just before we met up now, because it's a hot day, I had a very enjoyable hour just lying on the sofa as if I had no bones in my body at all. And I don't think I was smelling any roses, but I was just in a very pleasant reverie of, I've been writing because I'm on another book, so I started writing very, very early today. And I was lying on the sofa thinking, I have earned this lie down. And I was thinking also about what I'd have for dinner later. So I think I'm perfectly capable of seizing those moments, but other people might disagree.
I think we can allow an hour on the sofa. Maybe a tub of roses rather than smelling the roses. I think that's quite good with a lay on the sofa, isn't it?
A tub of roses, like a rose sorbet or something. That sounds delightful.
No, the
Roses
chocolates.
chocolates, he means.
Oh
Yes,
gosh. Oh wow,
Catherine
that's
knows. Yeah,
absolutely
Ben,
showed me up there. Bloody hell. I'm not a
you're
chocolate
out,
guy, I'm
Catherine.
afraid.
You're in. So I'm told, Catherine, that you co-founded the UK's friendliest book festival.
That's right. It's called Prima Donna Festival. We're actually this year for the first time having a pause since 2019, but it has been just the most joyous, amazing thing. It started because a friend of mine was running music festivals, and she discovered she's in the music industry, and she discovered that she really liked the spoken word parts of music festivals. And she said to me very casually, did I think there was room for a new book festival? And because I've been an author for a long time, I've travelled around to a lot of the traditional ones. And I realised that not only was I seeing the same group of authors and an extremely undiverse group of authors, myself included, but the fact that I would be one of the most, if you like, diverse people in the lineup tells you a lot.
Mm.
But it wasn't just that the authors were the same authors, it was that the audiences, who were lovely, but they were all very much the same audiences. And I thought, there has to be room for something that brings in other voices and people who've never been to festivals before. So that's what we really set out to do, and it just worked. It was amazing. Our slogan is "The world as it should be" for one weekend.
Oh, gosh, that is actually quite delightful, that, isn't it? Just imagine, I can just really imagine turning up to it and just trying to embody that the whole time. Sounds gorgeous.
You've picked the wrong year for it, from the sounds of it, Ben.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. It does seem like a lot of festivals are struggling this year. I don't know if that's just my
No,
perspective, but
there's
I live in Cambridge, and the Cambridge Folk Festival isn't happening this year either.
there's festivals. I mean, I hope we will be able to continue, but there's been a perfect storm of basically arts funding cut across the board at councils and from central funding pots like the Arts Council England, but also the cost of living crisis, and the cost of energy, and the cost base of festivals rocketed just at the point where, one of the other things about our festival is we don't one of the ways in which we have broadened the kinds of people who can appear on stage is that we don't assume that people are rich enough to subsidize appearing at festivals as a way to showcase their books.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
we pay people's travel and expenses, and we try not to, we try and pay people for their services as well. And it is really important to do that, and also to keep ticket prices really cheap. So, 70% of the people coming had never been to a festival before, which is just, for me, that's music to my ears.
Yeah.
But it also makes it hard to sustain. And we could, to be honest, have put on a festival this year, but it would have been a really pared back one.
Mm.
And we thought we wanted to be true to our vision and not just do something for the sake of doing it. It's funny. I
Yeah.
mean, I co-founded the Women's Equality Party as well, and we took the decision to close the party, and that too could have kept going. But I never believe in doing things for the sake of doing things. I think that's what's wrong with a lot of things in the world, is that people continue them because they're already happening, without standing back and saying, but is this true to why we were doing this in the first place? And for me,
Sure.
that's always a question with everything, whether it's a book that, you start and then you get halfway through and you look at it and you think, not sure this is what I intended. And then you make yourself reassess it. I think those are questions that we need to be asking all the time.
Wonderful answer and outlook. I think it's definitely the case that if something's worth doing, it's worth doing well. I remember my granddad telling me that when I was knee high, and he was trying to teach me how to be a carpenter, and I just wasn't any good at it. But but I
Did you
definitely
ever
I learned that lesson.
get good at it, or is the lesson that
No.
you learned not to be a carpenter?
Yeah, I think that was probably the. That was he also tried to teach me how to draw architectural drawings as well, and I still can't draw. So, but he imparted a lot of life lessons, so I'll take those instead, I think. Well,
I
so
have to praise you
go on, go
before
on.
we move on. I've got to praise that they're taking the time to pay for travel and pay people for their time.
Oh yeah,
As someone
absolutely.
organising a festival, I've spent 10 years in the music industry, getting 5 band members and gear and roadies all over the country to play festivals for a crate of beer and a kiss on the forehead, because you're told that that's all that can be done. But I think it's absolutely commendable to be taking the time and the effort to make sure that people are being treated well for their art. And I couldn't let us go further without applauding you for it.
Thank you. I mean, I feel really strongly about it, and that's why, I would really like to keep the festival going, and I'm involved in other things that are about widening access, because the thing about, you always hear that the reason that there are 700 Etonians running the country, for example, is because they're the best people. And no, it isn't. It's because they're the ones who have had all of the opportunities to be in the room in the first place. When we were setting up the festival, there was a woman I really wanted to get involved, and she said to me, I can't even afford to come to a meeting. And we found a way to find money for her to come to the meeting in order to then be part of the founding group for the festival. And, it's like, and I'm so glad that she found the courage to tell me that, because lots of people wouldn't have done so. But, that's the way the world works, and it shouldn't be, because that's why so many brilliant voices get excluded. The people, as my dear departed husband was in the music industry, and I've seen people being exploited in that industry as well. The idea of that, the only way to get your breakthrough is to give your content and your performance for free to somebody else, in the hopes of maybe having that breakthrough. And then, of course, the only people who can afford to come and watch are the ones who have childcare, have transport, who can take time off work. They're not on 0 hours contracts, and that's not right.
No. Do you run like a creche at the festival for the people that need childcare to accommodate them whilst they perform and read?
We've got all sorts of ways of supporting people, but that was also a big thing with the Women's Equality Party, is that we realised that one of the reasons that women didn't run for office was that they had so many caring duties. It wasn't just childcare. It was that they were earning less. They were typically in jobs where it was less easy for them to take time off. And then they'd say, oh, but we also can't leave the caring duties. So part of the funding that we provided was for care for the candidates. So again, it's identifying what the barriers are and then dismantling them.
I'm thoroughly enjoying this conversation, but I think we need to move on to some stories. But I would love to circle back to the Women's Equality Party, because it sounds like a really fascinating time in your life as well.
Yeah.
But for the moment, our regular listeners will actually be finding something new in this episode, as instead of the usual short stories, today we are showcasing the work of our guest, Catherine Mayer. So, Catherine, what story have you got for us?
So this is an excerpt from my novel, Time Life. It's funny. I referred to being quite old before. I am now just turned 64, and this is my debut novel. So although I'm a veteran and indeed best-selling author, and also long-term journalist, and have done a load of other things, I had never actually got round to publishing a novel. But this one was in my head almost in complete form. It's not the first one I've written. It's the first one I decided to show to anyone. And it was in my head in pretty much complete form, and almost entirely written, well, 2/3 of it written by the end of 2019. And I'm telling you that before I read this edited extract, because there is something strange and for me quite heartbreaking about the novel that meant that I nearly didn't publish it. I wrote this, as I say, most of it in 2019. There was a plot. It's a reworking of H.G. Wells's time machine, which I've always been obsessed by. And I had lost a lot of people close to me had died. And I was thinking, what would these Silicon Valley titans like Elon Musk do with the time machine? And I thought, well, they'd use it to exploit the future. They would use it to plunder the future. And I thought, what would I do with the time machine? I'd probably try and visit people I'd lost, or I might even try and save them. So that was the initial prompt. And I started writing it in the back of my husband was in a band called Gang of Four, and I started writing it in the back of his tour bus in February 2019, because tour buses, by the way, are quite, as you will know, quite scuzzy and rather boring. And I always needed to take myself into another world one way or another. And but the story that I wrote, it has two interwoven stories. One is about the time traveler who's he's called Elo Halvoran, and he's sort of an Elon Musk character, but he's definitely not Elon Musk. And he has a time machine, and he ends up with a former time journalist traveling into the future. I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but I am actually an ex-time journalist. So although the character called Dory is not me, I was playing on the word time and my whole knowledge of what it is. I used to be the Europe editor of Time magazine. So I wanted to write also not just about technology, but the far right populism that's taking over the world. And I wanted to write about the ways in which the death of mainstream media have contributed to this world where we believe everything and nothing. So that's one strand of the story. And the other strand of the story is about Dory, the former Time journalist. And she is trying to save the love of her life, who's called Morgan. And Morgan has been hospitalized. And there are so many things that I wrote in 2019 that came true in 2020, but including, as I'm sure you know, my husband Andy actually died in the pandemic. So I had already written this story where she goes to see, so that the piece I'm about to read to you is about her going to see Morgan in the hospital. And I had written about a pandemic in 2019 because I needed it as a plot device. So there is something very eerie about the excerpt that I'm about to read to you. And I will start. Morgan is a time traveller. 1 minute, subject like the rest of us to time's dictates. The next, pausing its flow to hover in suspended animation. If the bed were a capsule, the mattress dry ice, the scene that confronts me as I tear into the ward could be lifted straight from a movie. Morgan aboard the Nostromo or Discovery One, insensible to the danger ahead. Staff lead me away, usher me to a family room, lay out risks and probabilities as best they can. Morgan's body and mind are under siege. The coma could give the team the time they need to address the physical onslaught. Downside is that patients awakened after protracted periods of induced oblivion do not simply open their eyes and welcome a new day. Most suffer post-traumatic amnesia. Many will never recover. A nurse asks if he can give me a hug. Nope, sorry. Then starts listing ways I might improve Morgan's odds. Most of these offer empty reassurances, whistles on airline life jackets. Sleepers are astronauts, adrift from their mothership. Yet he encourages me to talk to Morgan as if my words might weave a tether. Should I remind him that sound is the vibration of particles, space a vacuum where nobody can hear you scream? There's also a Goldilocks quality to this advice. Too little stimulation bad, too much worse. The last thing comatose patients need is to be roused to reality, and no more than a 1 in 3 chance of getting it just right. Caution must be exercised around the equipment, nor is the danger of infection to be underestimated. Touch nothing, the nurse warns. What? Not even those elegant hands, bruised and porcupine-spiked with cannulae? This privilege is to be denied all visitors but me. He has one more rabbit in his hat, an exercise book. Take it, he says, thrusting it towards me. This will be a letter in a bottle for the future Morgan, a way to understand the currents that washed us to whichever place and time Morgan's consciousness returns. I stare at the title without comprehension. Critical Care Patient Diary. The phrase is printed in large type above a form. Patient's name, patient's medical record number, date of admission. The slogan occupies the bottom right corner of the cover. Showing we care. The font casts pretend shadows. Somebody has written a sample entry on the first page. Another nurse. Hey Morgan, it's Chris. Early this morning when we met, you had been struggling with your breathing, so you agreed for the doctors to put you to sleep and help you with your oxygenation and carbon dioxide. Also, you have had lines inserted into your neck and groin to allow us to give you important medications. Night Nurse Chris proved the last person to talk to my darling in realistic expectation of a reply. It will be over a week until I write anything. Story here, with apologies for the delay. I've been crazy busy organising your social life. You've always been a wonder of the world. Now you're a site of pilgrimage. After that, the friends and family clamouring to see Morgan complete the diary on my behalf, their contributions quickly filling all but a few pages. You're gonna need a bigger book, I tell Morgan, mimicking Martin Brody in Jaws. The joke falls flat. During this period, my love isn't the most receptive of audiences. Also, the image is unfortunate because there's a fin circling the bed, blood in the water, a gathering menace of bass notes, just the two. Da, 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 da. Once or twice I glimpse the disturbance out of the corner of reddened eyes, convince myself it's an illusion, clouds reflected in water. Of course the monster breaks surface, as monsters always do. Restrictions will be imposed, unprecedented precautions to stem the spread of the virus that is dominating news headlines. From tomorrow, only Morgan's brother and I will be allowed to visit. Soon that dispensation too is denied. Morgan continues to orbit while we observe from a distance. When the nurses hold up their mobiles, I see my beloved as through the wrong end of a telescope, dwindling to a point of light. Otherwise, nothing about Morgan changes, no deterioration, no improvement. Clinicians profess themselves flummoxed. They also look ragged. ICU is overflowing with non-contagious critical patients transferred from other units in a vain effort to contain the virus. Plague carriers are consigned to a single floor of the hospital dubbed the Red Zone. And another call, a senior consultant. It must be serious, and it is. Morgan has tested positive, is being transferred to the zone. The news comes as an axe at the end of a slow-motion arc. You'll recall those days, all of us frozen like deer, eyes turned to rubies by oncoming beams. How could we stand there, passive in the face of avoidable tragedy? Before I loose a barrage of questions, will the light of my life survive? What does this mean for a body already so ravaged? The consultant delivers a second blow, one I didn't see coming. The team has revisited Morgan's original diagnosis of a sarcoid flare complicated by sepsis and pneumonia. Had this been correct, Morgan's lungs would be striated like sedimentary rock. Instead, ground glass opacities are disappearing into the whiteout of a cytokine storm. Radiologists see such patterns often nowadays. Though the date of Morgan's admission theoretically rules out the virus, doctors have retested bloods taken that day, and there it is, squatting amid Morgan's genetic material, the alien RNA. The results are astonishing but irrefutable. unmasking my love as a serial offender against temporal laws who manages to contract the virus before it officially exists, only to opt out of the initial lockdown it unleashes. Morgan's greatest trick of all is to survive. When, months later, those beautiful eyes finally reopen, they find me in my usual spot by the bedside, as if I had never not been there. Later the same day, Morgan asks haltingly for a cappuccino. Oh, if this is not the sweetest music ever heard. I rush to the cafe, collect the order, apply cocoa in the shape of a heart.
That was deeply moving. Thank you, Catherine.
The
That was,
funny thing is, I don't know if you can hear, but I'm crying.
I think we could get that a little bit, but you wonderfully
Yeah.
read through that.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful delivery.
Thank
Very
you.
honest, very not performative in any
No.
way. Obviously, you're giving a performance because you're reading, but it was a very clear and honest reading, which is one of the most wonderful things you can really have. You know, there's no element of putting a show on. So
Yeah.
yeah, it felt very personal, very emotional all the way through.
Well, thank you. I'm very.
Well,
I have to say, I'm very glad that a very wonderful actress called Annie Aldington read the book for the audiobook, and I'm so glad I didn't have to do it because there are two things. One is it's very kind of you to say that was a good delivery, but I'm definitely no actress. I never will be. You know, a bit like you never being a carpenter. And the other thing is that it does make me cry because it's just such a weird thing that I anticipated so many things that would happen, and although I did some when I finally decided to finish it, I did do some updating, you know, and I added, you know, a few details like the cytokine storm or the RNA. Basically, that was all already there, and other things were already there. You know, I had the character who is not Elon Musk, Elo O'Halloran, buying a social media platform called Fleet, for example. There's a ton of stuff like that. So yeah.
I mean, you mentioned the cytokine storm, and I thought that was just a wonderful alliteration, and there was some amazing writing throughout, and it was just, obviously deep emotion, and it's very, very, very sad. But the thing that struck me most about that was the enduring voice of your writing, which inherently has an extremely endearing sense of humor. Like the stuff about Jaws really
Yeah.
captured me, and we're going to need a bigger book, things like that. It was so well observed and very, in places very funny, despite the fact that it's deeply sad, and it's that classic tragedy comedy, two sides of the same face thing going on here, and it's deployed really well. I found that to be very moving because it did have ups and downs. It wasn't all, doom and gloom and sadness. It felt real because of the humor. Yeah, I liked that a lot. Thank you.
I
Not
think
just Jaws either, absolutely laden with cinematic references. It was lovely catching them even early on with as soon as you said Nostromo, I thought, oh, it's going to be good. We're going to get on, Catherine and I, because we like the same spaceships.
but it's that thing about humor and grief. I mean, there have I've had, as I say, I've had a lot of loss in my life, and even before Andy died, and before the stuff in this book came true in a horrible way for me, I'd lost a lot of people close to me, and one of the things I'm terribly aware of is like how essential humor is, but also how unavoidable it is. Some of the funniest things that have ever happened in a hospital, and when Andy was then as Morgan is, but without the recovery. When Andy was in a coma in the hospital, and I was sitting vigil by his bedside, I had that was before people were barred from hospitals, but only just. They started a beer smuggling operation for me, and the numbers of jokes around, no corona on the wards. I mean, I can't tell you, and there's just always funny, really funny stuff. I mean, Andy himself, when he was brought into hospital, he had this absolutely deep-seated, entirely irrational hatred of the colour purple, which had been a sort of lifelong joke with us, to the extent, for example, that one of my sisters once organised a dinner of about 30 people that we were arriving to, and it took Andy a while to notice that every single person there was wearing purple. And quite an elaborate practical joke. Anyway, this same sister and I were in the hospital with him when he'd first been taken in by ambulance, and they were asking him, have you coughed up anything? And he said yes. And they said, what colour was it? And he looked at us and said purple.
No.
And and it literally, even we didn't know he was dying, but even when he was dying, he couldn't stop himself from making jokes like that.
No.
And it is, they are very close, those two things.
Very. And to maintain your sense of humor in that scenario, I think, is a noble thing. It's important to try and go out as you lived, I think. And yeah, gosh, I'm pretty moved, actually. Nico, have you got any feedback about the story?
I forgot something, by the way. I was saying there were two reasons I was glad that Annie Aldington had read the book, and the other relates to me crying. Is I have before I wrote this book, because the timings of this book, but I published also a memoir, which is the sort of much more straightforward telling of what happened with Andy and everything else. My publisher got me to read the book, and the person who recorded the book is a wonderful guy called Santi Arribas that I actually record audiobooks with, but was a great friend of Andy's and used to be a sound engineer and mixer for him. And so one of the awful things was I was reading all this stuff that was terribly upsetting to both of us.
Yeah.
And I had to get all the way through the whole thing, but at various times both of us were crying during the recording, and so I was so glad not to have to do that again with this book. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the problem with writing sad stuff, even if there's funny bits, it's going to make you cry.
And should.
One of the things you captured really well, and it counterplays the finding comedy in the sort of darkness, the dark periods of your life, is that way that hospitals dress up documentation and pamphlets to have this sort of larger than life, everything's going to be fine. I get a lot of stuff about diabetes, and it's always people throwing frisbees and living sort of these extreme lives to the fullest, and none of it ever looks real or pleasant or sincere. And I think you captured that really well in the the medical journey diary.
Oh, the
That
showing we care, the font casting pretend
Yes.
shadows. Yeah, that was
that
wonderful. Really well observed.
it's something that it really rang true for me, because they do love a word art printed out on 4 or 5 bits of A4 and then stuck together on the wall in a hospital, as though it's going to inspire you to medical greatness.
Well,
And
surely that one's like the actual staff trying to do something with limited resources and time, whereas like that showing we care font that's a deliberate, like, this is the thing that we put on the front of these books, isn't it? It's a lot more sort of commercialized than word out on the wall, I think.
the one
The
I was
reason
really please go on.
Sorry, the reason I said the thing about in that section about whistles on life jackets is, who actually, when you watch the in-flight safety instructions, thinks that if they got to the point of being in the sea wearing a life jacket, that knowing how to blow a whistle would be helpful. And they used to put on airliners, I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, but they used to actually have like little lace antimacassars on the backs of the seats and little lace curtains at the windows. And they did that to try and make people feel that they were still in their front room. And the whistles on a life jacket or the antimacassar on the back of a airline seat is exactly that false reassurance. No.
I don't remember that, unfortunately. I think I'm possibly a little bit too young for that one. But I recently went to the Duxford War Museum, and they have a very old, early airline example, and all decked out how it would have been. And the back of it, so what would be now on like a Ryanair flight, like 30 fucking seats or something, is actually just a ladies' powder room. That's all it is. It's like two different rooms. It's got a nice curtain. It's got a vanity mirror and a place to sit at it and all the rest of it. I just thought this is one of the strangest things I've ever seen on a plane. But actually, it's nice. It's a good thing. Yeah, little tangent there, but go for it.
It is strange now, though. I mean, it's unimaginable now to think of someone sitting down on a flight, opening a pack of 20 cigarettes, and chain smoking their way through them as they take the journey. But it was a regular occurrence. There were ashtrays in the arms of every seat.
There's there's two stories I have to tell you quickly. One is in Time Life. Quite a lot of the action is set in Indonesia. And I spent a lot of time as a journalist in Indonesia. Brazil is the other. Well, there's Brazil, Las Vegas, Indonesia, and London are the sort of main, and bits of New York are the main settings. But these are all places I know well. And but with Indonesia, I used to travel around. They had these terrifying, tiny, commuter airlines, but they would do things like fly over volcanoes and you catch a gust of hot air and it would just shoot upwards. One of the things they used to do, they had these cigarettes that you could basically burst a blood vessel in your eye trying to smoke them because they were so tightly rolled, called kretek. And they used to pass out kretek to everyone as they got on the plane and encourage you to light up. And then they would dangerously overload these planes. And I was once on one of these planes that did 4 or 5 attempts before the richest man on the plane bribed some people to get off so that we could actually clear the palm trees to take off. But also I was just thinking in terms of in that in the memoir that I was talking about, which is called Good Grief, I wrote that with my mother, and I basically wrote it because of my mother, because my stepfather died at the start of the pandemic as well. And so I ended up looking after my mother, who'd never lived on her own, and she called us twin widows. But of course, this was in lockdown, and she was already 86, and being told that she was expendable. And she started writing letters to my dead stepfather that were wonderful letters that were kind of telling him all the weird shit that was going down. And my publisher saw a blog that I'd written about Andy and COVID. And she said, "Oh, I really want you to write this as a book." And I said, "I'm not ready to do that, but here are these wonderful letters my mother's written." And then my publisher came back to me and said, "Actually, you need to write the book that goes round it, but I would love to publish these." Then I thought, well, it would be so churlish not to give my mother a new lease of life, which she died in April, but she really loved being what she referred to as a published author. And we did the book together and then did all the promo together and whatever. So it was a great kind of final coda for her. But
my condolences. By
the
the way,
story.
that's difficult.
Say again.
My condolences, by the way. That's difficult. That's recent. So my apologies.
Thank you. But the story, she told this really funny story in the book, which was the funny thing. I don't think she actually told the context, which was when she walked out on my father. But when she walked out on him, we were in an airport and she couldn't get flight because there was an air traffic. No, our flight was sort of indefinitely cancelled or delayed or whatever. And she wanted to get back to the man who then became my stepfather. So she disappeared and then came back and said she was going to get on this flight. And we were in Athens, by the way, and she was going to get on this flight and go, and it was going via Switzerland or something. And she was going to go and be with the man who became my stepfather. And what I only found out later, and she told the story in the book, was when she got on this flight, which was going via Zurich, they had not had time because of the air traffic controllers strike. There were only very few slots, and so it was a very hurried takeoff. They hadn't loaded any food and drink, and a lot of the people who had been on the plane, who were on the plane, had been waiting in the airport for at least a day, so they were terribly hungry and thirsty. And the one thing they had was like a packet of digestive biscuits and a cup of tea per person. So they handed that round, and just as they handed it round, the person across the aisle from my mother had a heart attack and died. And I shouldn't laugh, but the woman next to her leaned over and said, "Do you think anybody would mind if I had his biscuit?"
Oh, good Lord. Oh, she sounds
So
like quite a
again,
woman.
yeah, but again, you have the humor in a very dark situation.
Gosh. I mean, this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation about the story, but the story itself, the excerpt itself, was wonderful. I just want to highlight again that I really enjoyed some of the wonderful writing. I wrote down whilst I was listening to it that your writing felt a little bit like being in a very measured and deliberate way punched with emotion, and it was just it carried me through it with these wonderful turns of phrase, like even as early as when you just said insensible to the danger ahead, and I just knew that I was going to get on with the writing. And then we had stuff like protracted periods of induced oblivion and lungs striated with sedimentary rock. There's just wonderful similes and language and use of metaphor throughout it. It was beautifully layered, and yeah, I was really taken with it. So thank you. We're used to giving feedback for short stories that are written to the same prompt as you know on this, but it's really really wonderful to be able to hear something that's been published before and edited to be able to be told in this format. But the big one for me was the bruised hands with the porcupine spiked with cannulae. That really grabbed me. There's always a line that grabs me in every guest story, and that was the one that grabbed me quite early in yours. And the reason I liked it was because the description of the hands being bruised is simple. It's very simple, and people know what it is. It's horrible. The idea of having bruises on your hands is unpleasant. It means that you can have limited dexterity and all the rest of it. It tells a lot with a single word, and then it goes into a slightly more kind of verbose but very eloquently put porcupine spiked with cannulae, and I was just very very taken with that. So thank you.
I'm glad. It's funny because I do care an awful lot about writing. I love writing. I actually love the process of writing. I know lots of writers are quite tortured about it, and I'm somebody who writes for fun as well as for work. So And even though I've been telling sort of some sad stories about my life, I'm one of the luckiest people ever, because I have been able to do and make a living from the thing that I love, which is an unbelievable privilege. So it's really with writing, even when I was doing news journalism, I couldn't ever turn in something if I felt the phrase was clumsy, so I've always kind of self-edited. One of the things my editors, both at journalistic outlets, but also now with books, they will always sort of note is that I hand in incredibly clean copy. I don't. I'm because I'm also an editor, so I edit myself as I go. I just, as I say, I love it. I words mean so much to me. The joy of doing that, joy of being able to sit here and lose myself and to build worlds as well. That's another thing. Again, whether it's non-fiction or fiction, you enter into another. You do time travel. I think that's the other reason I love the idea of time travel so much, because I do it every day.
Yeah.
I think you can definitely tell the joy that you feel in your writing from reading or listening to your writing, because it's a bit like when you see, a professional athlete or someone of that ilk. It doesn't really, sports doesn't need to be part of this, but I just mean somebody that's good at something doing it because they love doing it, and that kind of love of the game being the reason, and you can sort of feel it like an aura around them. It's I definitely got that sense from your writing, so it's lovely to hear it reinforced, because it's important. It's what we're all about on this podcast. Like, we love telling stories, and we love the art of storytelling and the impact of storytelling and the meaning behind telling stories. It's what Nico and I bonded with initially, how we became friends, and then many years later, it's why this podcast exists. So yeah, that's gorgeous.
It's funny because the other bit of my biography, if you like, is being an activist, and people sometimes see those as disparate. But I think effective activism is storytelling. You cannot change the world by telling people. It helps to show people maybe what's dysfunctional, what's wrong with it, but you have to get them to care enough about their dysfunction to then do something about it to effect change. And in order to get them to care, you have to tell the story that makes them care. So basically, I think storytelling is the golden thread through everything.
I mean, on that, I think we should just note here, this is an excerpt from Time Life, which everyone can access. They can all buy a copy online, and we'll be sure to point the social media post for this episode at the place that you can get this book.
Can I say something else about Time Life, which is, as I said, it's my first novel. I'm very proud of it. It's had some amazing responses, including from people that I don't know if you know who William Gibson is, but he's a major league hero to me.
Cyberpunk.
Yes, and
yeah.
he described it as multiplexly brilliant.
Brilliant. Oh.
I mean, Elif Shafak was wonderful about it. Sandy Toksvig, who's a friend of mine, gave a very nice quote, but she said, by the way, am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Absolutely.
I am, because you
Go
did.
right fucking head.
You did. Good, thank you. When she was first reading it, I really wanted to use what she said when she was first reading it rather than the quote she gave, however nice the quote is, because she sent me a text and it goes, I'm sitting in a cafe in Cambridge reading your book. Fuck, it's good. And I just thought, fuck, it's good. Sandy Toksvig would be my favourite. but what I wanted to say is it has been really interesting because all of my non-fiction has been published by the big beast publishers, and I've got a deal with HarperCollins, so I'm writing another book for HarperCollins, but my Charles book and my book, a book I did about age and aging, were with Penguin Random House, and so I'm basically used to going in with the sort of big marketing budgets and the big planning meetings, and the book I'm writing now isn't supposed to be out till next year, and we're already discussing the cover. So that is the sort of experience you have, and the cover and the marketing campaign and everything. That's the experience you have if you're signed to one of the majors, if you like. But for this, I have this really interesting and rather deluxe experience of I've gone with a beautiful small publisher called Reynard Press, which was founded by a guy who also just loves writing, but also really cares about all those values I was talking about before, about inclusivity and taking down the barriers. And he's also wanted to do something that would be climate positive, unlike a lot of publishers, and would take the ethical line on everything. So he founded Reynard Press during lockdown and has already won awards for it, and already has this big list of amazing books. But so it's a proper indie, and the one aspect of it that they do audiobooks, but only in a kind of fairly small way. And I love audiobooks. I'm very, very fond of listening as well as reading. But also because my husband was in this band Gang of Four, and I've always helped out with writing lyrics and things like that, I ended up co-writing a song to go on an audiobook that I had in my head already, as a sort of more in-depth experience of the book. And so I wrote a song called Rocket Men with a brilliant new band, which is partially formed from splinters of Gang of Four DNA. I'm not sure you can have splinters of DNA, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
The former Gang of Four singer AJ Starry and Santi, who I mentioned, who I work with anyway, they formed a band called Rear Window, and we wrote this track Rocket Men, which was a single but is also on their album. And so I really wanted to do this kind of full production audiobook, and to my delight, HarperCollins decided to put out the audiobook. So that's a very long-winded way of saying, if you're looking for the book, it is in beautiful print form from Reynard, but it is beautiful audio form from HarperCollins, so you can get either.
And can we listen to the
Yourself,
song as
get
well?
both.
Yeah,
You can absolutely listen to the song. There's a video. There's a kind of amazing video we made as well that you can find on YouTube. And as I say, it's called Rocket Men by Rear Window.
And is that a Hitchcock reference? Are we still in movie references?
Rear Window is a joke, actually. So Andy and I, when we were first together, we lived in this flat. We were together, I talked about being lucky. Andy and I were together for nearly 30 years, literally just shy of 30 years. So although, people see me as unlucky as a widow and all of that, I've had a really good life, and I can intend to keep having a good life. But what I mean is, I think that's I try and see that as luck, really. And Andy was very he took over this first flat we had. We must have been nightmare neighbours, because he basically set up a recording studio in our living room, and it was in a complex where you could really see into everybody else's flats. And we quickly discovered that there were some terrible exhibitionists who lived in these flats. And I'd come home and Andy would be working with his band or other, because he produced all these other people, and they'd basically be hanging out the window watching people having sex in the other flats. And then one night there was this couple who were always doing it, and one night then we saw an argument between them that was kind of obviously very fierce, and then we didn't see her after that.
Oh, God.
And so Andy became convinced that he'd murdered her, and that the man had murdered her, and he spun this whole Hitchcock story around our neighbours. And so at the time he was working on, trying to think whether that was the Michael Hutchence album or which album that was that he first used it, but it says on the album sleeve, it says produced at Rear Window Studios, and actually Rear Window Studios was just
Your living room.
Our living room. But then we moved, where I'm speaking to you now, we moved to a place where we could actually build a proper recording studio. So there's a full-on recording studio here, which has actually no windows whatsoever, but we called it Rear Window Studios.
Gosh.
That's fantastic.
I totally agree with you, by the way. I think you are lucky. I think you have had a lucky life. I think it's been lovely, and power to you for keeping that trend going.
We've we've talked quite a lot about where you are now, but I'm going to launch into our interview questions, because I want to know, who was your inspiration to start telling stories? Where does this all begin?
So I'm really the only member of my family who's not in the entertainment industry, of my immediate family, or who wasn't at some point in the entertainment industry, including one of my grandmothers was a novelist, another grandmother was a singer. She was an archaic. My strange accent, by the way, is that I'm originally American, but I've lived all over the place. And so she was an RKO Radio City musical star, and my father was a theatre historian, and my mother was, she was involved. She ended up doing press and publicity as her main thing, but she was with London Contemporary Dance Theatre and then places like the Royal Court. But when we were growing up, which was in America, they would read to us at night, but they didn't choose children's books. My father used to read, for example, The Odyssey to us as an adventure story, or Jane Austen, or whatever it was. So, and by the way, one of my sisters is Lisa Mayer, who wrote The Young Ones. So in that thing of having writing as something that is an enjoyable thing that you share clearly has an influence, because there are two of us who are professional writers, and my other sister was a theatrical agent for a long time.
Sorry, you have to give me a moment to get my jaw up. I bloody love The Young Ones.
By The Young Ones, you mean the Rick Mayall, Ben Elton?
Yeah. So my father, who was the theatre historian, he was the professor that they studied under at Manchester University. So Rick and Ben and Aid were all undergraduate students of my father, and then Lisa and Rick became a couple, and the rest is history. And in fact, my other sister, when she was an agent, was the agent for Alexei Sayle. So the whole Young Ones thing was something that I would say arose out of the same exposure to storytelling very early on.
Having an out-of-body experience, I recently listened to Berserker, which is Adrian Edmondson's biography, and I think your sister was mentioned many times.
No, she would be, and my dad, David Mayer. Oh, by the way, talk about out-of-body experiences. I said I managed accidentally to predict Andy's death, the pandemic, Elon Musk buying Twitter, lots of other stuff that you'll see in the book that I predicted. But my father recently broke ChatGPT 2 years after his death, which is, if you don't believe me, there are two headlines I need you to Google to see what I'm talking about. There was a Guardian story about him written by Emma Graham Harrison back in, I don't know, about 2017 or something. And the headline is a very memorable one. It's the strange case of a university professor mistaken for a one-armed Chechen rebel. And that was my father, who was also American, suddenly discovering that things that he was ordering from America or transactions relating to America were being stopped. And we found out that he was on a terror watch list because a Chechen rebel was using his name, David Mayer, as an alias. And this was even more surreal because the Chechen rebel was known to have been killed, but even so, they kept my father, who was at that time 90 years old, on a terror watch list. And we were trying really, really hard to get him off it, but then he died at the age of 94 in 2023, and that still hadn't been resolved, and we didn't think anything more of it. And then I can't remember exactly when, but really a few months ago, maybe 6 months ago, I got a call from the New York Times and they said, "Do you know that your father is breaking ChatGPT?" And I had no idea what they were talking about. And it turned out that if you asked ChatGPT who is David Mayer or to talk about David Mayer, it would shut down. It would just crash. And and it seems to be some kind of algorithm that had picked up enough knowledge to know that this was, there are lots of theories about why this happened, but it seems to be related to the earlier story about the one-armed Chechen rebel. So
somehow
yes, talk about
inside the, gosh, what a story. I love it.
Yeah, well, my life is sometimes literally stranger than fiction, which is quite funny in the circumstances. But yeah,
If you
and
wrote it
that's
down, no one would believe you.
no. Well, that's why I'm telling you. Look up these. Just Google David Mayer, professor, and ChatGPT, and you will find what I'm talking about. Or Google one-armed Chechen rebel and David Mayer.
I have just done it, and it is true. It is there.
I don't feel like I can have one-armed Chechen rebel in my search history. That feels like I'm going to end up on a list.
I also note from the Guardian article that your dad was also a veteran of the US Army as well, which is another angle on things there.
Yeah, well, he was drafted. I mean, again, another bizarre story. He was drafted in the Korean War, and he was. They put him, because he spoke Spanish. They put him in charge of a Hispanic platoon, and he used to think it was funny to wake them up by quoting Shakespeare at them. And he'd go, "Lo, where rosy-fingered dawn at yonder window breaks," and they'd all throw things at him. And then they realised he was never going to make much of a soldier, so they transferred him into the sort of storytelling division, where they were making films that were about instruction films for soldiers. And one of his best stories was about trying to make a film for soldiers about how to deal with snake bite, if out in Korea. And they got an amputated arm from a hospital and a live snake. And they spent hours trying to film this scene where they were going to get the snake to bite the dead arm, but the snake was completely uninterested in dead flesh. So they ended up killing the snake and using a live arm.
Oh, gosh. I don't know why, but I was immediately transported to as though the person whose arm that was watching that happen
I,
as well, which I think added a level
there
of
is,
irony
well,
to it.
also the things
Yeah,
about, one-armed rebels, my father's had more.
just keeps
Yeah,
coming up. Yeah.
again, things repeat. There are patterns, and I don't believe in, even though I've predicted all this stuff, I don't actually believe in extrasensory perception or whatever. But I think patterns are patterns are part of stories, and patterns are part of the way that the world works, and there's nothing sort of mysterious about them, but you need to notice them.
Mm.
It's really interesting how many Americans of a certain age, when you look into their history, I mean, especially great American creatives and creative minds who were pulled into the military and then ended up getting put into the thing they could do. Like Stan Lee, one of his first jobs drawing was published was he drew a series of comics explaining to soldiers why you should use contraceptives
Gosh,
so that they
really?
could pass them out to the soldiers.
It's a far
And
cry from Spider-Man, that, isn't it?
yeah, well, I don't know. It's all shooting webs, isn't it? At the end of the day.
Gosh, I mean that is possibly one of the more interesting answers to that first question we've ever had. I wasn't expecting the one-armed Chechen rebel or the amputated arm. It was wonderful. So this question is, I've always found this really quite interesting. But do you feel connected to a particular culture or subculture? And if so, has it shaped the way that your writing career has gone?
That's an interesting one, because the subculture that I'm connected to is the a person who is somewhat stateless and unconnected. As I said, I spent my childhood being very peripatetic. We moved back and forth between the UK and the US quite a lot, but we also moved around within the UK. We lived in Greece for a bit. I then, had a tiny little stint at school in France, and then I decided to do a degree that involved languages, and I ended up going and living in Germany, and then going back and living in Germany, and then of course, I wrote in German for 11 years, and which, by
Wow.
the way, when I say I love words, I love languages as well. So the things are for me, they're very connected, and the different musicality, and I love the portmanteau words you can make in German, and I always want to do that in English. And I sometimes do. I mean, my first book was called Immortality, which is a word I made up. But the I think although I have now, I became a naturalized citizen here a long time ago. I feel I would be happy to describe myself as a Londoner, but I don't feel like a Londoner as in, I wasn't born within the sound of Bow Bells or anything like that. I don't have any sense of place that is my tether, because you're always a foreigner here, even if, like me, you can only just hear the accent being a bit different. Your consciousness is different, and in America, I'm absolutely a foreigner these days. I mean, I feel very alienated by America as it currently is anyway. But even before then, I had thought that I would go back and live there at some point, and now I no longer think that. But the converse of that is, I've always found it really easy and delightful to immerse in new places. So, like when I went to live in Germany, I just loved that. Had such a good time at university, and then such a good time living there afterwards. And I think it makes it makes it easier to move around. It makes it harder. Just as I have a sort of if people say, what do you do? And I have to give about 7 different things that I do if I'm going to answer them fully. Similarly, if you ask me where I come from, you get that sprawling answer I've just given you because I don't really know the answer. And I'm descended from, like most Americans, or many Americans, there are very few who have been there for more than a few generations.
Absolutely. Whereabouts? What did you grow up in America? What
Well,
region?
I was born in Wisconsin, which is, a sort of quite a rural state next to the Great Lakes, and people most often know it either for beer or because Wisconsinians are called cheeseheads, or because of the Green Bay Packers is the other famous Wisconsin export.
I definitely knew it as the cheese one because of all the jokes in
Cheese.
Frasier about Roz being from Wisconsin and that being the cheese state. But yeah, wow, what an incredible nomadic existence that it sounds like you had for a long time.
Yeah,
Yeah, nomad was exactly the word I had
Yeah.
in mind.
Yeah.
that's also why, I was a foreign correspondent for a really long time, which is, when I said about knowing places like Indonesia or Brazil or whatever. And I think it was, I also think being an outsider is incredibly useful as a journalist because, and being an outsider, having an outsider eye that you understand enough of the world that you're looking at that that you can orientate yourself in it, but where you just have a little bit of distance that means you can observe and understand it. And I mean, I noticed it a lot with the sort of slightly, I think probably the thing people find most surprising about the combination of things I do is why somebody who's a feminist would also write a biography of King Charles, for example. For me, it all makes perfect sense. But one of the things about a lot of the sort of people who have to report on the royals all the time or write books about the royals is that they really sort of become acculturated and they start dressing like them and kind of wanting to be part of it. And I like, with journalism, I do like to do things where it is the last thing I would ever want to do, but where I'm interested in visiting it again, like a time traveler or traveling to another planet or whatever. That's exciting.
Intrepid, I think, is potentially a word that I would put on that. That sounds wonderful. I have a question actually, which is what sort of time period were you in Indonesia?
I was there. Well, I never was based there for long. I spent 6 months there as a stringer. And it was during there was a sort of very nasty little conflict going on in East Timor, but I was doing all sorts of stuff from there. But then I went back later as a foreign correspondent, and there was this person who had been the general, the one of the military chiefs most implicated in some of the most brutal parts of what went on in East Timor, was now running to be president of Indonesia. And he he's was it was so interesting. He was this strange individual, but he allowed me to come on the campaign with him. He was always a bit scary. He used to say things like, when we were in a helicopter, about, I could throw you out of this. And but he famously, when at one point, the most inappropriate juncture, had got hold of the microphone and started singing My Way into it in English. And he later put out his own really dreadful album of cover songs. But he didn't. He did not. He's called Wiranto. Again, you can look him up. So I went around with
I'm gonna have
Wiranto.
to.
But
That's Shatner-esque.
but that's
But
You faced
sorry,
the wall.
yeah. Go on.
the reason I asked you about the Indonesia thing was that a few years ago I watched a wonderful Peter Weir film that was from, I think it was in 1982, but it's called The Year
Yes.
of Living
Yeah.
Dangerously, and it's about foreign correspondence in Indonesia during a fairly nasty overthrow of a
Yes.
president.
Well,
And just a lot of the stuff you were talking about really conjured that for me, and I'd sort of half forgotten it, but it's a wonderful
I
movie.
was there. I was there during not that particular period, but during a very similar set of unrest. And I remember, again, these are things when you write, you can just, if you have that kind of recall, you can go back and reconstruct a scene. And I was taking shelter in a hotel lobby in Jakarta, and it was a 5-star hotel, and there was this extraordinary riot going on outside, and whenever anybody got too close to the doors, it would trigger the doors to open, and you'd suddenly have this gust of noise and heat and screaming coming in, and then the crowd would surge away and the doors would shut again, and the piano player was playing all the way through that kind of lounge music going on, and everybody sitting there frozen. And so there are I think that's the other thing about having lived the kind of life I do, is that I have sort of a filing system of scenes that I repurpose, where there's a sense memory as well as everything else. So it makes it easier to world build.
That gave me chills.
Yeah, serious chills.
Do you still get that call of the nomad? Do you wake up some mornings and think, I need to go halfway across the world?
I mean, one of the things that's been really weird about the last few years is because we had lockdown and of course nobody traveled, but also, I was widowed at the start of it, and I suddenly, for the first time in my life, instead of being somebody who always traveled, I was somebody who was always indoors on my own. And I actually developed, I think, a kind of agoraphobia for a while, which I think a lot of people did in lockdown. So when it was first, but also something about leaving home, people kept telling me that I'd want to sell this place, and I'd want to move out and whatever, because it would have all my memories with Andy here, and of course it's why I want to be here. So I think I also found it very hard to leave home because it was the closest I could get to him. And so when I first was contemplating traveling, I was terrified, and I went and did a book festival in Germany, and it was the first time I'd travelled on my own. I also did a sort of there's an organisation called Names Not Numbers. I did that in Wales, so I did a couple of I spoke at Names Not Numbers, and then I went to speak at this book festival. But I realised I was shaking and terrified of just flying to Germany. Is such a mad thing. Somebody like me who's just travelled all over the world and in conflict zones and whatever. So as I say, I think it was a form of agoraphobia. That, by the way, was the most bonkers festival I've ever been to. I was so glad I went. So they wanted, I did an updated version of my Charles book. Again, by the way, my ability to foresee things, it came out, the updated version came out 2 weeks before the Queen died, and everybody kept saying, how did you do that?
What?
How?
But I think you have got a time machine.
But anyway, I went to Germany to talk about this book, and they showed me such incredible hospitality, but like all the local dignitaries, the mayor of the region turned up, and the local politicians and whatever. And I got to the town, and they had posters of me, really giant posters of me all over the town, and it said in German, "We can't bring you royalty, but we can bring you the next best thing." and then they had bagpipers to pipe me on stage. It was just wonderful.
Gosh. That's certainly one way to get over a bit of agoraphobia, isn't it? That just bagpipes to ease your passage.
We now know that if someone is definitely Scottish or from a bit of everywhere, bagpipes are the instrument of choice.
Bagpipes are
Which
always
is,
appropriate. They're iconoclastic. They're loud. I love them.
It was
that you're a tradies showing.
It really is.
but they actually chose a hilariously inappropriate tune. They thought because the book was about Charles that they'd play the Sky Boat song, Speed Bonnie Boat, which of course is Charles the Pretender.
Classic Germanic undermining of British monarchy that's also Germanic. But so I think this is actually a perfect segue into one of my other favourite questions, which is what role does religion have in storytelling for you?
Well, again, just like I'm sort of stateless, I'm also religionless. I am of I'm sort of Jewish-ish. Again, a really bizarre. I don't want to take too long telling all these stories, but a really bizarre thing that happened last year was I got a letter from Vienna, and it said, "We think you might have information about this person." It was in German, and the name of the person was Georg Rosenberg. I went, "Oh God, that's my great uncle." And it turned out that Austria had changed the laws on what to do with property that had been appropriated by the Nazis. And originally it had been down to the descendants to apply for it. In 2021, they changed the law, so they have to find us, which I think is because they know that we're all quite old by now. And anyway, it turns out that my great uncle was a paleontologist in Vienna, and my sisters and I and some cousins are inheriting some fossils and dinosaur bones and stuff in a museum. But we're giving it straight back to the museum. We're not going to. My mother's response was, "How will you dust the bones?" But
Official brushes for that.
But again, this is about storytelling, because what I've got is my his brother, who he's not actually my blood great uncle. Just to make this more complicated, he's my grandmother's second husband, was Leopold Rosenberg, who changed his name to Leo Roberg when he got to the States. But he got to the States. Georg could not get taken into any sort of safe country in Europe, couldn't get to the States, and he got stuck in what was then the British Protectorate of Palestine, did not want to be there at all, hated it, was trying to leave. And so I've actually got his letters written from what is, now actually where he was is now part of Israel. But given what's going on, one of my next projects is to go through the letters, because these are letters from somebody who didn't want to be there and who was desperate to get back to Vienna. But the story about why he was there was so interesting. Anyway, that's a story obviously about, that's more, Judaism isn't just a religion, it's a kind of culture and ethnicity and God knows what else. And my mother's father was Jewish. My father was Jewish. My mother's father was Jewish. But my mother's mother was the RKO Radio City musical star, very beautiful woman who my mother's Jewish father fell in love with and insisted on marrying, even though she wasn't Jewish. And because Judaism passes down through the matrilineal line, that means that although in terms of what any Nazi would think, we would all be far too Jewish, we're not actually Jewish, and I've grown up without any kind of religious identity at all. Though obviously I have a bit of a cultural identity, but even that is mixed up. And by the way, every book I ever write, nobody ever knows where to shelve it. It's always more than one genre. So The Time Machine, nobody knows whether to put it in mainstream fiction or in science fiction. And literally everything else I've ever written, I'll have those debates with booksellers where they get quite kind of, they love that conversation. Where should we put your book?
Do you ever
think
express a preference? Like, is it better to be in the main section or to be in science fiction and things like that? Is there like an obvious right answer to that?
No, I wish there were, because I just want as many people as possible to read Time Life, and it has a cover. It has a very beautiful cover that's more sort of literary fiction cover. If you wanted science fiction readers to read it, it would have been better to do a more sort of graphic cover. Though not a woman with large breasts. I think we're beyond that stage in science fiction, don't you?
Yeah, I'll agree on that one.
Yeah.
Gosh,
I think you've got an obvious route here, though, which is just to continue being both fascinating and prolific until they have to give you your own section in each bookshop. That's the trick,
Oh,
isn't it?
that would be weird. But with my family, we could probably do it.
Just printouts of articles about one-armed Chechen rebels and
I'd be fascinated to read those letters of somebody that doesn't want to be in in Palestine at that point. That would be absolutely fascinating. I have forgotten the name of it, but there was a really quite an interesting BBC TV show many years ago where they told a dual narrative over two different time periods of a girl in the modern era going to Israel and reading letters that her grandfather sent home whilst being a British soldier there during the partition of Palestine and Israel, and it was absolutely fascinating. So I'd imagine I'd get a very similar kick out of your letters.
Yes. I think there may well be, if not, I don't know whether I would want to do a book about this. I don't think so, but I definitely think I'll do a piece of journalism about it.
aside from when you're going through the fantasy section and picking up books with unforgivable covers, what themes do you look for yourself when you're choosing fiction?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. Themes, I don't know. And I think that probably changes over the years. I don't think, for example, I was ever big on, sort of straight romantic fiction. But I would be probably less interested in romance now, anyway. Having it, but it's not that's not just a function of age, because I still like a good coming of age story. Um, but it's more. I think I do like ones that have a bit of a sweep, so it doesn't have to be as straightforwardly about time travel, but I do, and it doesn't have to be epic, it can be quite narrowly focused, but I like something that has a sweep, either in terms of its ideas or in terms of its range, its emotions, whatever. But I do, by the way, absolutely love good literary science fiction, of which there is some spectacular stuff out there.
Do you have a particular trick for picking books then? Because it's quite difficult to. Obviously, we don't judge a book by its cover, although some are very nice and some are really rubbish.
Um,
Do you have a method when you're seeking books?
no, but part of the problem I have is, because I'm always writing books, I quite often read a lot of stuff that I don't particularly want to read, but I'm reading for research. And then it means that my time for reading for pleasure gets much more curtailed than I would like. And then I get asked to read a lot of books before they come out with a view to blurbing them. And so I end up reading books not because I've chosen them, but because they're sent to me. I judged the Women's Prize for Fiction one year, which was both wonderful and terrible because you had to read 50 books in a month. Um, and I really loved it, but that was interesting in terms of like what makes you stick with a book. I mean, I felt very strongly that it was important to give not to just sort of like dip into it, think I don't like that and chuck it, because some books are slow burn and some aren't. And so there was almost nothing that I didn't read all the way through. The one exception is if I see bad writing, I can't get past it. So it's not really about themes, but you know, where there's really lazy writing.
Go on. How would you, do you have like a way of classifying like lazy sort of bad writing? Is there like a obvious tell?
There's things like very tired phrases that you know, somebody could use a phrase like almond shaped eyes rather. Somebody could use that in an ironic way, or because the eyes really did look like almonds, or um, you know, there might be reasons for using that phrase, but you'd have to have one.
Right. So like over reliance on stereotypes and
Yeah, but I didn't mean
truisms
I
and
didn't mean that
things
just be. I mean that one is a racialized stereotype quite often, and that would put me off as well. Um, and indeed, H.G. Wells has rather a lot. Although H.G. Wells is an amazing writer, if you look back at some of his stories, like The Invisible Man, they're full of racialized stereotypes. You know, obviously a Victorian writer, so a product of his time, has
yeah.
a bit more of an excuse. No excuse now. But I also just meant in terms of laziness, like, you know, clouds like
Cliche.
clouds like candy floss. I mean, some clouds do look like candy floss, but you know, and it's not just similes. It's I don't know, when you notice that people, there is no problem with repeating words if you're repeating the words on purpose. There is a problem with doing it because you just have not noticed that you're doing it.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, I think that leads us beautifully on to the next question, which is, what is your editing process? Because I know for myself, like it really bothers me when I'm writing a short story or writing something longer, and I realize that two sentences have the same word next to each other, and I'm just like, how did I not see that whilst I was writing it the first time? And I take a lot of pleasure in cutting it out and reworking the sentence so it's better. But what is your editing process?
Um, my writing and editing process are sort of linked because my writing tends to be quite fast flowing. But that's because I also used to be a news journalist, so you had no time not to be fast. And so I come from the school of get it down and then make it perfect. And um, for me, there are tricks to seeing that kind of that phenomenon you just described, where you think you've written something really elegant, and then you look at it, and there's some kind of awful howler right in the mid, you know, clunking thing in the middle of it. The easiest way to spot that is to look at it in a different font. So I these days send myself stuff and read it on my phone. Um, because just seeing it in a different font will make me immediately alive to infelicities that I would have otherwise skipped. If you have,
It's a great. That's almost like a hack, that isn't it? Putting it in a different font to see it in
yeah,
a different way. That makes a lot of sense to
and
me.
if you have
Yeah.
time, I mean, this book that I'm writing now is monstrously huge, and so I started writing it last year. and I have not read the first chapters now for a very long time, which means by the time I come back to looking at them, I will be reading it with fresh eyes, almost as if I were just the editor and not the author. So that's the other hack. So write really long books.
You write really long books and take a long time doing it.
Well, I don't think
I like
I
it.
don't think I'm taking a long time, given how bloody huge the book is going to be. But yes.
Yeah, no, it wasn't a criticism. I was just, I was taken with the idea of not seeing the first chapter for a long time. Like I recently finished work on a novel and tried to submit it, and it, first novels tend to be a little bit difficult to go anywhere with. But I felt like I saw that first paragraph, that first chapter, that first sentence about 1 million times, and I was so sick of it by the end. So I think that's a really, really good idea to just leave it and then come back to it.
Well, I
later.
did that, of course, with Time Life, but I did it for very sad reasons, because I had written the 50,000 words and then Andy died, and I just thought, I can't believe that I wrote what was going to happen, and I'm not going to look at this again. So I literally just didn't look at it. And then it was when Elon Musk bought Twitter, and I went, fuck, I think I wrote that. and I got it back out, and then I started reading it, and then I decided that I actually really liked what I'd written, and that's why that. But if Elon Musk hadn't ruined Twitter, I would never have revisited the novel. But because at that point, that's what had happened. I read the 50,000 words again, and then was able to sort of. I actually took some of my pandemic stuff out of it because I didn't want it to be a pandemic novel. And then I just finished it. But I finished it almost like as again with fresh eyes, as if somebody else had written it.
Do you think there's any worry that you're going to predict more strange comings in the future? Like, when you're writing Billionaires, do you ever think about putting, and they decided that actually mega capitalism was wrong and they shared their money, just in case you have a power and you're causing these things?
Yeah, well, I did try that with I wrote that book called Attack of the 50-Foot Women, and although most of the book is about why women are still unequal and what underpins inequality and all the different mechanisms that need to be unpicked in order to achieve equality, I also thought that one of the barriers to equality is that nobody can imagine what it would be like. Usually when as I said, activism is about storytelling. And for me, one of the things I realized, particularly when I was talking to people in the demographics who thought that they would lose out from female equality, so it tended to be older men who would assume, oh, but we'll have to give up seats on boards or whatever. And I just thought, or they would say, oh, people like you just want everybody to be the same. You want all the sexes to be this, all this. And I just thought the easiest way to answer this is to write a science fiction chapter. So I wrote this whole very sort of deeply researched book about the roots of inequality, and then I take everyone to the future on the final chapter, to a place called Equalia, and I walk you through the streets of Equalia, and I show you that it is not a perfect place, and that but it is also a place, a very vibrant place with all sorts of things going on. And so I think that kind of storytelling and extrapolation, and again, I wanted somewhere people wanted to get to. And as you see, obviously I've brought about gender equality across the world. So yes, I have that power.
You waved that wand.
Yeah, right.
I love this idea of showing an imperfect and therefore perfect utopia, because there is this trend. Well, I don't know, it's just me, but I think generally people find utopias to be quite disconcerting when they get portrayed in fiction. And there's a tendency for them to then morph through like horror mechanisms into dystopia. But if you show it to be, warts and all, but better than what we have now, then that seems like it's a really good approach to actually communicate your message of your story.
Well, I don't want to give too many spoilers with Time Life, but there is, of course, a very deeply realised future world in there. And I would like to say that it is quite ambiguous what kind of world it is, because I think utopias and dystopias are both, that neither of those things are our world, whichever direction it goes, and it's going a terrifyingly bad direction at the moment, is never going to lead to either. It might lead to a dystopia, but it's more likely to lead to something else that we can't imagine. It's certainly not going to.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the conditions to produce a utopia right now. That's for sure.
I've become really stuck on this. You said about these men saying, "Oh, you just want us to give up our seats on boards," and there must be some deep-seated fear of people becoming aware of the inability of these men, right? Like to think that just because people have the same opportunity as you, that you would no longer be worthy of your ill-gotten gains.
But they
What a
always
strange way to tell on oneself.
they always
Yeah,
talk about that, because they also will hate the idea of quotas or other ways to get more women, and not just more women. My activism has always been around the intersections of other kinds of inequality as well. So. And all the research shows you, which is again something I was doing in Attack of the 50-Foot Women, all the research shows you that you get better outcomes when you have a lot of different people rather than a lot of people who did go to the same school and think the same things and don't challenge each other. And one of the I've completely lost the thread.
That's okay.
What the hell was I saying there? That's so funny.
We've dragged you down to our level.
Yeah, I know. It's also very hot. I'm currently melting.
Yeah, I am
but
slightly.
we were talking about the way that.
No, I know exactly what I was going to say. It was about quotas. It was that they always say, oh, but if you have quotas, then you're promoting people who are less good than we are. And in fact, there is an unofficial quota that operates, and it's called the unofficial quota of the mediocre man. And so they're overrepresented on just about every level of every organization still.
Yeah.
But anyway.
No, I think you're right. I mean, the only thing I will add to that is that I started a new job relatively recently, working for an NGO that's concerned with climate governance at a board level, and I've been very pleased to see that we aren't in that capacity speaking to a lot of old white men. That if there is a progressive board out there, then it is likely to be far more diverse than the boards that we're talking about now. And so those are the boards of companies that are actually going to be able to profit from the planet being healed, and potentially a greener, brighter future. And so I think the final nail in the coffin of the board full of old white dudes might well be climate initiatives, and that makes me quite happy.
That's good. I mean, I think I wouldn't. Activism is optimism, so I wouldn't be an activist if I didn't think it were possible to create change, because otherwise I may as well just stay on my sofa for forever.
Eating roses.
But the thing about the world we're in now is it is the scariest I've ever seen it. And I started like I co-founded the Women's Equality Party, for example, or I set up Prima Donna Festival in order to speed change that was going in the right direction but too slowly. And we're now seeing this massive backlash, the weaponization of woke and all sorts of stuff that is undoing a lot of the work that a lot of us have been doing for a long time. And you're seeing rights stripped away, and you're seeing wars and famines and all the other sort of biblical dangers gathering with this sort of rising far right. So I think, and climate change is of course part of this, that the people who deny it. So I think we are at this incredible precipice. Precipice is a bad image because it is a kind of crossroads. But there you are. That's the kind of lazy writing I wouldn't allow in a book. But this is where storytelling is so crucial, because in order to get enough people to care enough to understand even what's happening, and then to do what is necessary to stop us going down the route to perdition, we need to be telling really compelling stories.
Couldn't agree more.
I think
Full
you're
stop.
spot on. It's
Yeah.
As a proud punk, I think there's never been a time when we needed the vox populi to manifest more than this. Wild animals lash out when you corner them, and that's what this, as you've just perfectly described, this rising far right is doing. And I find it extremely gross a lot of the time to not even be able to reflect moderately on the past and see our failings and learn from them. Is such a failure in the human condition. So much power to you and to everyone who believes that your voices can affect change, because they can. So use them.
Yeah.
So I think we've mentioned it potentially a few times, and I don't know how much you can actually talk about it, Catherine. But what is your next project, and are you interested in expressing it for our viewership?
Yes. Although I think the title's going to change. The original title, the working title, is "Send Them Victorious." Royal Women, Their Battles, and Why We Should Care. But what it is it's a project. I've returned to writing about royals, but from a very, very different viewpoint. I'd been under a lot of pressure, shall we say, to do another royal book for a long time, because the Charles one is a bestseller, and publishers like that. But I never, people kept saying, "Oh, you should do a biography of Kate Middleton." I was like, really? And then the funny thing is, I'm writing a chapter on her at the moment, and it's absolutely fascinating, and it's one of the best things I've ever written.
I bet it is.
But the reason is because I found the framing that I really I'm passionate about. The passion has to be there, and what it is it suddenly really occurred to me that there is a I don't know if you know, Sandy is working on Sandy Toksvig, who's my great friend and co-founder and whatever. She's working on this project called Mappa Mundi, which is trying to find ways to basically tell women's stories globally, because women are erased over and over and over again. And in history, of course, you see that there will be great stretches of time where you only see stories of men, where records are not preserved about women, and where they're marginalized or sort of squeezed out of the picture, and we know so much less about them often. And then there are these sort of wonderful women who come along and who in some way redress that balance. There's this book called the Book of the City of Ladies, for example, by Christine de Pizan. That's amazing. But anyway, what it occurred to me was that royal women have a very different fate. They're pinioned in the public gaze, and therefore, although a lot of people I know say, "Oh, we're not interested in the royals," well, you bloody well should be, because the stories that are told about royal women are told globally. They are very visible, and they have been visible through history in ways that other women are not. And so the stories that we tell about them are incredibly important to what we believe about women. And so I'm starting with Anne Boleyn, and I'm working my way through, Anne Boleyn and Elizabeth I and Mary the First, Mary Queen of Scots, right the way through Victoria. I don't do every single one, but Queen Charlotte's in there. Also, going through then to the modern royals, and it's from Anne Boleyn to Meghan. And what
That sounds truly
I'm
amazing.
doing is I'm using it to tell the story of mass media as well. So Anne Boleyn, for example, is the first royal woman to be the subject of dueling culture wars biographies, because of course she's caught up in the ultimate culture war, the Reformation, and she's there. She comes to her very brief and brutal queenship at a time when printing is just taking off in England, and each of the women, I've sort of chosen them because there's a huge gap between what we think we know about them and who they were or are. And so with Kate and Meghan, you're going right into the realms of artificial intelligence and the kind of crazy fake films about them on TikTok and all of that kind of stuff. The disinformation and who's spreading it and why. So yeah, it's a huge sweep. I said I like a sweep, so I'm going right the way from Tudor times through to now.
I love the idea. I have a bit of a tangential question for it, which it sounds like it isn't covered in the book, which is why I can ask it now. Do you have a hot take on Eleanor of Aquitaine in this? In this, obviously it wouldn't be in the book because it's very very much pre Anne Boleyn, but she was a very famous and she was regarded in both France and England because she was queen of both at two different points.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wondered if you had a.
She appears in this only in a very walk on role, but I'm just trying to see if I can find it. I probably can't find it quickly enough, but let me try. Oh yeah, no, I found it. Yeah. So I said that AI is part of this story towards the end. I was doing a search, and the search that I was trying to do was which royal women have been accused of using sexual wiles to get ahead, because obviously that was one of the big charges against Anne Boleyn, and a lot of the depictions of Anne Boleyn have her as this sort of, person who managed to entice Henry VIII not only into her bed but away from the Church of Rome. So I am searching this on Google, and Google's AI replies to me, women who use sexual wiles to get ahead include, so not who are said to use sexual wiles, but women who did.
Just include.
And the very first one, and this is, by the way, worry for the future just on the basis of this answer alone. Eleanor of Aquitaine flirted with her uncle and sons to secure the thrones of France and England. Elizabeth Woodville, the wife of Edward IV and grandmother of Henry VIII, she used her heavy-lidded eyes like those of a dragon to become the mother of a dynasty. Elizabeth I used flirtation as a metaphor for her reign, creating a rhetoric that allowed female authority to flourish. Baroness Thatcher compared to Gloriana for her coquettish prowess and self-aggrandizing ends. Anne Boleyn flirted for 7 years but met a rapid demise.
That is extremely unsettling, because Eleanor of Aquitaine is one of the most accomplished statespeople of that period of history. She's incredibly bright, and she made like a marriage not because she had to, but because she wanted to, and things like that. Like, it was just.
And
that's horrendous.
that is what, supposed, artificial intelligence is such a misnomer. But anyway, that's what happens when you have large language models scraping the internet and getting the dregs. Anne Boleyn flirted for 7 years but met a rapid demise. I mean, my God.
Rapid demise. Who doesn't meet a rapid demise?
It's like a line from Hamilton, isn't it? I've got a hot tech tip for anyone listening, and that includes 2 of you, so sorry. Google's AI overview cannot pass swear words. So if you want to search without it popping up, instead of asking, how many teams are there in the NFL, ask how many fucking teams are there in the NFL? Because you'll get the same results, but it can't use the AI overview. So have fun with that, everyone.
We've been hack heavy this episode.
Can I just suggest that also, if you want to use ChatGPT, that you might say, "Who is David Mayer?" who the fuck is David Mayer?
There you go. Gosh, this has been our first showcase episode, and I've had an absolutely wonderful time speaking with you, Catherine. I was just wondering if you could let people know that are listening where they can buy Time Life, and also where they can follow you for more news about upcoming projects, and indeed read more about your previous projects as well.
Please buy Time Life. Please read Time Life. Please let me know what you think of it, because even though I'm this sort of like weird battle-hardened veteran, this is like such a passion project for me, and it's my first novel, so please let me know. As I said, Renard Press is this brilliant indie press. You can order it direct from them. It's Renard, like the French word for fox, RENARD press. And by the way, they publish amazing new writing. They have a lot of debut writers on there. So by the way, good place to submit. Will probably now end up being deluged because I've said that, but it honestly very good, amazing working with Will. So you can order direct from them, or you can order from, nasty places like Amazon, or nicer, more ethical places like bookshop.org. Pretty much any online bookshop. It's not particularly widely distributed to bookshops because it is from an indie, but your local bookshop will very happily order it for you. And you can also get on Audible and Amazon and all those other things, you can get the audiobook. So that's where you can get it. My social media, I have a website, which is Catherine Mayer, all one word, .co.uk. I need to update it, but I will do that. It's got the William Gibson quote up front. I'm going to give it to you because I can see the whole thing now. It's multiplexly. This is on Time Life. Multiplexly brilliant, intricately fascinating, harrowingly emotional fiction sprung from this century's first and possibly final quarter. William Gibson.
Gosh.
My social media, I have a very silly name on most social media. I am still on X because I need it for research, but I'm not really posting there. But that's my normal, that's at Catherine_Mayer. But everywhere else I'm at Mayor of London. And it's Mayer is MAYER, is MAYER of London. But periodically people think I'm Sadiq Khan and shout at me. But I'm on You know, I'm on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, Facebook. I'm probably on some others that I've forgotten. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on TikTok. I'm under my normal name on. I don't think on LinkedIn they'd let me be there as Mayor of London.
You could try listing it in your CV, see what happens.
No, seriously, I get shouted at about like the low traffic neighborhoods and stuff.
Do you ever sort of like have a glass of wine and just start waxing lyrical about real issues to do with inequality in response to those? Like, be like, yeah, I know the roads are shit, but do you know that insert statistic here?
Um,
Do you know?
I
Do
no,
you
I'd
sort of
start a
go
smear
for it?
campaign. Every time one
Smear
of you
campaign.
pays the
Yeah.
ULEZ, I ejaculate. That's-
No, well, I've
Fantastic.
spent way too long not replying to people because I mean, joking aside, I used to get quite a lot of death threats, and
Oh
and
dear.
a lot of well, you get loads of if you're even before I was we co-founded the Women's Equality Party, I got my first death threat back in 2013 or something, and back in the time where they actually sent a policeman round to me because I'd had a death threat. Can you imagine that? And I think one of the things that I've learnt is that you can feed the beast, you can feed the algorithm if you reply to people who are trolls, or if you reply to people who have views that you disagree with. And there's a woman who keeps going through she periodically goes through my output on social media, and she thinks that I don't care about Gaza because I'm not putting stuff on social media about it. And I keep saying to her, sort of like, you know, people do activism offline, you know. And
Yeah.
and she literally, she goes through and she goes like, you know, typical bloody white middle class feminist, you know, I can see you don't care about these things. Oh, look, you said something about women in Iran. And I'm going, well, it's, you know, actually because it was possible to say that thing about women in Iran without actually, I was making anyway a point about media coverage, rather than, as it happens, which I often do media criticism online because you can do that. But if you talk about any of the most polarized issues of the age, which are polarized in ways that are destroying the ability of the progressive left to do the things it needs to do to fight the populist right, you're going to increase polarization, and you are going to potentially boost ideas that are anathema to yours. And so, no, she can get in the sea. I'm not going to post more about Gaza just because she feels that I should, in order to, you know, and you know, by the way, one of the many other hats that I've worn is I used to run a data think tank, so I really know about the tech stuff, which she clearly doesn't. So anyway, sorry, that was a little rant, but it's such a fun, it's such a funny,
That's okay.
it's such a funny thing. So I am very active on social media, but I'm very active with things that I feel will, you know, that you can post about. And I do not hold with posting about everything just to show that you care, because you will quite likely end up with unintended consequences from that.
Well, you apologised just then for you've self-titled it a rant, but I will not call it such. But as with everything you've said to us this evening, it's been fascinating and genuinely just wonderful to spend the time talking with you, Catherine. It's I would welcome you back on in a heartbeat.
Well, I'm happy to come back again.
Oh, it's delightful. Maybe when you've not got a pressing deadline, because I feel bad for stealing you away from your deadline.
Well, I write at 5 a.m. So what I'm going to do when I hang up from you is I'm going to go and have something to eat and then go to bed and get up really early and write. But I'm really happy to do it either with the new book or else to do the short story version, because as you gather, I do actually love writing, and it was quite sad for me not to do the short story version, but I'm really glad to have been able to read an extract from my book.
This has been a real joy for me, and I think for Nico as well. So thank you.
Yeah. You tell us when you want it to happen, but I can speak for Ben and myself, and I'm pretty sure our audience when I say we cannot wait to have you back.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For rich ginger tones on their scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La, How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?